Good evening. We'd like to call the Thursday, April 8th Finance and Operations meeting to order. It is 5:15 p.m. We have a few things on the agenda this evening. The first is to approve minutes from March 29th and April 1st. So do I have a motion for those two sets of minutes?
So moved, sir.
And do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, motion and second, roll call vote. Ms. Saros?
Aye.
Mr. Devon?
Aye.
And chair votes aye. That's unanimous. So the next order of business is we're going to continue to discuss our fiscal year 22 budget development. And before I turn it over to Dr. Hackett, just a couple of reminders. This is a public meeting. However, it's a working subcommittee meeting. So we do not have public comment on the agenda. We will be having a public hearing on Monday evening where you can participate and add your comments and questions at that time. So just wanted to make that clear that there will not be a public comment session in this evening's meeting. So Dr. Hackett, when you're ready, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Kors. Good evening, everybody. So tonight we're going to go over some of the slides that we had already shown you from the last session. And the hope is that, well, let me start by saying that the bottom line number has not changed. And the hope is that you would be able to vote the bottom line total budget number as a recommendation to move forward to the school committee for their public hearing on Monday night. So kind of working backwards from that, I just wanted to really kind of get at the core of this for us. As you know, we are looking at a $5 million reduction in our expenditure, overall expenditure, and we are looking to offset that reduction by using some federal stimulus money that we know we have it in front of us right now, as well as some money from some reserve account or revenue account for extraordinary special education costs from those state funds for the total of 1.4 million. And that would then bring the overall budget reduction down to about $3.6 million cut. However, the budget bottom line to bottom line from this current year to next year will reflect a $5 million reduction, but we will be offsetting some of those reductions, some of the cuts we'd have to make if we had to do 5 million by the 1.4 in federal dollars and state dollars. So the biggest, obviously, to get to a $3.6 million reduction is not a simple task, and we are really trying to stay away from cutting programs. So far, we've been successful in that. And when I say program, I'm not talking about services necessarily. I'm talking about programs such as world languages or PE art, music. We are working very hard to stay away from eliminating any program system-wide. But our challenge is really kind of around where our enrollment bubble falls and how our enrollment is distributed at the elementary level. So just to kind of recap a few slides around enrollment again, this kind of just shows you, it's I think a good visual on the bubble as it's worked its way through. You can see the top line are grades K through 4. As you can see, in 2016 we hit a high mark of 2,217 kids in those grade levels, and then as we carry into 2019. We are at 2,071. We did not update it to 2020 because it just gets a little strange with the 5th graders who have moved to East Middle School. Then you can see the 5.8 that would include all 5.8 that we had. The bubble started to make its way through in 2018, a couple of years behind the elementary move, and now we're starting to tail off 1896 in 2019, and that number is going to drop again next year. Fairly significantly at South Middle School in particular, but we're also trying to leverage the reduction in enrollment as we do every single year, but this year it's obviously a little bit different given the amount of the reduction that we need to make overall. And then the bottom line is the high school. And you can see that the enrollment has climbed from 2009 of 14.4 to 2019 of 17.15. Our current numbers are actually at the high school are 1836. So we have seen that bubble begin to move into the high school, and it will continue to move through the high school over the next 3 or 4 years. So this slide we showed last time, we're kind of highlighting and zooming in on the elementary level, particularly because that is the level that we are seeing a reduction in enrollment. Whenever you see a reduction in enrollment, there are resources that become available in terms of teaching positions that you don't need in order to maintain reasonable class sizes. You can see I won't go through all of them, but Liberty's on top, Morrison, Highlands, Hollis Highlands, and then Flaherty and Ross. In general terms, and if you just look at both Flaherty and Ross, you can see that particular side of town is seeing a more dramatic reduction in enrollment than some of the other schools are seeing. Some of these numbers are thrown off a little bit by our flexible boundary policy, particularly Liberty, who has some of the drop in that overall enrollment as a result of us moving students to Hollis, new incoming students over to Hollis. But this gives you some sense of how our enrollment is trending by school through 2019 again. So this does also include all of our 5th grade students at Morrison, Hollis, Flaherty, and Ross. Just to zoom in a little bit more on these 4 particular schools, because where we're seeing both a leveling of enrollment as well as a decline in enrollment are at these 4 schools. And I'm going to show you in a little bit just how we're thinking about how to best take advantage of these declines of enrollment from a staffing perspective. And we've already talked a little bit about year over year, we always look to make reductions where we can if it's enrollment driven. Fortunately, in probably the 6 years that I've been here so far anyway, we've been able to use attrition through retirements. In the last couple of years, we've been able to do some of that at the elementary level, but now we are in a bit of a spot because we have class sizes at particular schools that don't allow us the flexibility to take a reduction that's reflective of the reduction in enrollment. So as an example of this, I wanted to show you these 2 schools, and this graph, this chart just shows Ross Elementary School and Morrison school year or fiscal year 20. These were the numbers, grade 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 at Ross Elementary. And you can see the same for Morrison down below. So the total enrollment in 1920 was 239 at Ross and 352 at Morrison. You can see it also obviously included the grade 5, which did not move until the 2021 school year. And then the number of sections during that fiscal year that we had at each grade level to essentially staff the grade 1 at 44. We had 2 teachers or 2 sections, 52 students, we had 3, and down through for a total of 13 sections at Ross in 1920. And then you can see similarly at Morrison, a total of 18 to staff Morrison for the 352 students who were there. In 2021, which is the year that we're in right now, you can see the enrollment by grade level at Ross, and you can see the enrollment by grade level at Morrison. You see the total enrollment. Now, this is obviously, the decline is very much related to the grade 5 being pulled in from these 2 schools, and that they are now at East Middle School. So that was to be expected. And then you can see the number of sections that we need to accommodate the numbers that we have here for in the current school year. It's a little trickier this year, obviously, because we have a lot of students in full remote and we have a full remote academy. So we've had to kind of back into the sections and the numbers enrollment. We have taken consideration that as we move forward, that we have some students who either homeschool or maybe went in a private school. So we have to really make sure we're allowing for the potential for return as we move forward. So currently we have 12 sections total, or 12 general classroom positions for grades 1 through 4 at Ross and 14 for Morrison. This is a snapshot in time too. I just want to be clear that these numbers fluctuate regularly, up and down 1 or 2. So this is not necessarily indicative of what happened, what it looks like today exactly, but it is a snapshot in time. So the average class size currently, you can see at Ross, the average overall is 17, I'm sorry. And then you can see by grade level what the average class size is. So I'm just going to highlight the challenge we have is that, in other years, we would have looked to take a reduction in a grade level, so that if we have a class size of 16, we would look to make a reduction so that we could use that position to either make a overall budget reduction, which is what we would be doing this year, but also to just redistribute the resources. When we have 48 students, we could take that reduction. We would go to 2 of 24, but you can see when you start getting into either grade 1 or grade 4, when we have 3 sections, we really can't make a reduction and go to 2 comfortably. So we're a little bit handcuffed as to what we can do with kind of redistribution of resources, because there are just so few section sizes. It's a similar story at Morrison as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of the overall impact of that in a second, right on this slide. So our projections for next year, school year 21-22, you can see by grade level at Ross, we're projecting a total enrollment of 192 students. Again, understanding that drop from 239 to 203 was primarily due to the grade 5 moving, but I will tell you that when I first got here, with grade 5, Ross was over carrying a total student population over 300. Next year will be at 192, and I just carrying the sections that we currently have. You can see, that if we stay at 3, we're already starting to see a reduction in some of the grade levels and the number of kids, but we're not going to really be able to take full advantage of that. So I had shown you a map, a transportation map, a districting map at your last meeting. I'm going to go back and show that to you again in a second, but this particular scenario contemplates redistricting 97 students from Morrison to Ross. And I want to be clear that right now these are scenarios. The overall need to redistrict, I believe, is there. So conceptually and from a practical standpoint, we do need to move students in order to leverage our resources to make the kind of reductions that we need to make to get to a $3.6 million cut. Or we don't do that and we're into the elimination of quite a bit of programming. So if we were to, for example, pull 97 students, and those, I'll show you where those students would be. First of all, there would be some, from a districting standpoint and from a transportation standpoint, although Ross is a walking school currently, we do have students who are walking quite a distance at Ross and not the best conditions. We would have to provide some transportation in order to accommodate that, but it would be an overall transportation reduction because of just the way we've districted out for Morrison and how far those students are traveling from where they live to Morrison right now in this 97 group. So when we just carry this forward, I think I've got the wrong total.
Yeah, the total's wrong, but you're going to combine the 45 and the 23.
Right. So the 45 plus the 23, thank you, Mr. Lee. So we're projecting 45 students. I don't know how that didn't carry forward. 45 students for next year in Ross alone if we did nothing. And then if we redistrict, we would bring 23 students more to Ross from Morrison. this number is the average class size, and I do know that this is accurate, if we did not add any staffing at all. So while there might be some discussion about whether 23 is the right number for grade 1, in a lot of places I can tell you it is. That is still a decent class size. Even within our school system, when you look at some of our schools, we are seeing class sizes at the lower grades of 20-ish, just because there's more population. So with that and with these numbers, if you look at this, we could theoretically accommodate 97 additional students at Ross without adding any additional general education staff. So obviously pulling 97 students out of Morrison has an impact on their overall population. These numbers happen to be right. So currently we're projecting 57 students for grade 1, for example. If we pulled 23 students out of that population, it would be 34 students. And then with the existing staffing, and there are currently 4 sections in grades 1 and 2, and 3 sections in grade 4 and 5. I'm sorry, 3 and 4. And then you can see at Ross, I should have said this earlier, grades 1 through 4, it's 3 sections across the board. So clearly, if we drop down to these numbers at each grade level, there's going to be the ability to make some staffing reductions or position reductions, I should say, because at this number with 4 sections, the average class size would be 9. So that's the work, that's the discussion. That's what we're trying to balance out. And, the challenge with this is that it is complicated, and we are going to need some additional time and to really kind of figure out to get it right. Redistricting is not something that can be done quickly or easily, but in our view, it is the only way for us to be able to make the reductions without getting into some significant reductions in program. In fact, I'm not even sure with program reductions we can get to the 3.6 number. So before I ask whether you have any questions, I just also want to show you the map.
Doctor, before you bring the map up, I do have a question on that last slide, unless you're going to bring it back up.
I will bring it back up.
Okay. Were you going to bring it back up again later? Or-
I was,
Okay.
but now you've ruined the surprise. So
Sorry.
I just want to show the distribution because I think visually.
Yeah, go ahead.
To the
Go ahead.
conversation.
Yep.
Let me unmute. I'm assuming everyone can see this now.
Yep.
All right, so this map represents all of our schools. You can see Ross is here, Morrison is here, Hollis, Flaherty, Morrison, and Liberty, and then Highlands is down here. So all of our elementary schools on the map where they are. What you're looking at right now is where our students who attend Ross live. These students it is again, as you know, a walking school. We have no buses that run for general education students at Ross at the present time. So when we talk about the 97 students from Morrison, what we're referring to specifically is the students who I've just added Morrison to the map in the blue. So the blue stars are Morrison students. What I'm talking about specifically is this area up here, over by the Braintree Electric, by the landing. These students currently are bused to Morrison. So what would happen in this scenario is that we would bring these students and would provide transportation, because some of them are a bit of a distance, 1, and 2, traversing some fairly busy intersections to get them to Ross Elementary School. This represents the 97, and then everything below the river And Commercial Street would remain, in this scenario, could remain at Morrison. So again, that's the group that we're talking about redistricting. I will show you just briefly. I'll bring up Hollis just as another example. We have, and all this stuff happens for a reason, and where students live and timing and developments, but the districting here has not been really looked at hard in quite some time. And when you look at what we're doing in terms of where we get our Hollis students who are in red, here's the Hollis Elementary School. Certainly you can see over in here what makes a lot of sense that would be these students would be part of the district. This starts to just get into the question about, is this naturally where these students should go? And from a transportation standpoint, I can tell you that it's no small deal bringing students from this side of town at the elementary level at the hours that we start from here over to Hollis Elementary. We have, obviously the Rotary is here. It's a fairly busy street, it's Union Street. And then we do have a run that brings these students to Elm Street and back down. But in particular, we're looking at the possibility of whether or not it would make some sense. And just from a numbers standpoint, to consider having some of these students attend Morrison. Again, conceptual, we've not made any decisions around this. We're still working on the numbers, but the overall idea and is the overall need is that because we have a reduction in enrollment, we really do need to consider the only way we can really take advantage of that in terms of staffing and resources is to look to do some redistribution. So with that, Mr. Kokoris, I'd happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I'll open up to the subcommittee first, and then anyone on the subcommittee have questions?
No, sir. I'm fine.
Ms. Saros?
No, not right now.
Okay. Doctor, my question is, I see the class sizes, and that's before you move students from Hollis or eliminate positions, right? Or eliminate sections?
Correct. Right.
Okay.
Well,
Okay.
because what we want to show, first of all, we don't know exactly what the redistricting would look like. So what we just wanted to be able to show to you is that the current staffing at Ross can handle another 100 students, reasonably comfortably.
Yeah.
And that's where we are just inefficient because we can't really take reductions as it stands right now, but with additional students, we would not have to add any additional staffing. And obviously the impact of that, if we have 4, 4, 3, and 3 grades 1 through 4 in sections at Morrison, this is the resulting class sizes, we would be making adjustments. Now, to be clear, when we talk about the Hollis section, and what I just showed you on the map, that might be something that we would consider doing is shifting some of those students just from a transportation standpoint. It's certainly more efficient, but also we would not be able to, we would need to, in my view, we would want to be putting some additional students into Morrison to accommodate for that shift. So it's a little bit of a impact or just in terms of how we think about the entire district. We could just look at Ross and Morrison, but if we're going to do that, then obviously we'd be looking to make some reductions in the grade levels here.
Okay, thank you.
So I'll just keep soldiering on here. This was the slide that you saw that we brought to you last time. You can see the current budget that we're in is $73,218,902. And what we're asking for is a proposed budget of $71,574,118, which represents a $5 million cut or 7.1% cut. As you remember, the initial directive from the mayor's office was to come up with a 10% reduction. This really is kind of at the maximum of what we would be able to do without making some real significant cuts in program. And with this, we are still looking to offset that $5 million reduction with $1.4 million in what is one-time revenue to get us through next year. But as we discussed, the federal funding will be, it will be allowable to spend federal funding in future years. And we do not yet know what our ESSER total amount's really going to be, nor do we know when we're going to get it, nor do we know what the restrictions are in using it. This does max out the ESSER 2 funds in terms of what we can use for revenue offset. There is a percentage, I believe it's 70 to 75%, that can be used for revenue offset. So we have maxed that out, and $400,000 of that is from circuit breaker. So that would then bring the actual expenditure reduction down to 3.685034, which is a 5%, a little over 5% reduction, for a bottom line budget number, which is what we would like to ask you to consider for moving forward to the full school committee for Monday night, of $72,974,118. And then just by category, you can see the rolled up categories, and not surprisingly, where the bulk of our money is just where the bulk of the cuts are going to have to come. We really are hard pressed to take many reductions in our building maintenance and grounds. We are pretty well maxed out right now in terms of the staffing and the ground that we have to cover. This does include some reductions. We also know that going into next year, we still will be having to deal with COVID, and special cleaning and disinfecting that we're doing currently will more than likely continue. And then district-wide services and technology includes everything from this office to guidance, health offices, and other services that are district-wide. So I want to be clear that these numbers are where we are right now. That does total that reduction that we need to make, but this can change. This won't change. That number, if the school committee votes it, won't change, but how we get there very well could change. And I think that that's what's most challenging about this process, especially right now in this early, is we don't know what our total Chapter 70 state funding is going to be. We don't know necessarily what our enrollment is going to look like going into next year. We also could have some additional retirements. Things can change a lot between now and the beginning of next year. So we really need the time to continue to work on where those reductions would come from. But at the base, this recommendation to you from us absolutely has to involve redistricting. And without that, then we would be looking for other cuts elsewhere, which would be, again, program.
Thank you, Doctor. Any questions for Dr. Hackett from the subcommittee?
Yes, Mr. Chair, if I may.
Mr. Devon?
Thank you. Doctor, we say savings and positions and things like that. When are we going to put numbers to it? And I really don't like calling them positions. They're people. And I think, although it's hard, it's extremely hard actually, we should know if we're going to do redistricting and some of these other plans, what the number reduction are. I mean, we've made allusions towards it. Do we have hard numbers?
Well, to your point, it is hard because what happens to us, or happens to any school system when you go through this process, is that just by contract, teachers who do not have professional status, which are teachers who are in their first, second, or third year of employment with us, are the first to go because contractually, that is how it works. It also, it does make sense because they've not yet earned professional status. So those reductions would happen first. And then, whether or not we would need to get into professional status teachers at the elementary level is still in question. But what happens to us is that we may cut a position that is someone who is a professional status person who is not the person who is going to get cut because they are going to bump somebody who is a non-professional status person in another job, in another school, in another section. So there's a lot of bumping that can happen through this process. We are working as fast and as hard as we can to identify exactly where those would be. But I can tell you it's still going to take us some time because we want to make sure we get it right. we may need to take a bit of an abundance of caution approach and notice more people than we might end up actually needing to reduce. But it'll be a few weeks before we really are able to get to the exact number that we'd be looking to reduce by building up by grade level.
Thank you for that explanation. What it does is it shows the complication behind the potential bumping. It does tell you the certain situations, levels of our teachers. I do think it's important that we let people know that, look, there are certain cuts that we're going to make that even if we do get money back, you can't uncut them. You can't. And I think that's something that has to be, shall we say, explained to people. I find it rather troubling myself. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your indulgence.
Thank you, Mr. Devon. Any other questions? Okay, hearing none. Doctor, I understand that this is still a work in progress. I think the thing that, and I think you said it earlier, so I want to make sure we clarify it for the public and for the subcommittee. We still are settled in on the number of 71, 574, 118. The offsets hopefully, will improve that somewhat, but that's the number that you're looking for us to bring forward to the public hearing in the school committee on Monday, correct?
Correct. What the offsets will change, Mr. Kokoris, will be this number. So it's still going to be $5 million worth of reductions. It's still going to be a $71 million budget. I know you're saying the same thing, but additional offsets, if we can add some additional funding to this 1.4, then we will be able to reduce the net reduction of 3.6 moving forward. So this is a cautious approach. We do know we have some idea what the federal funding is going to be the next round of ESSER 3, but I'll tell you that we were notified at least a month ago that those funds would be available within a few weeks, and we haven't seen them and we haven't heard any more. So as soon as we are notified and we can, actually know that we can count on that funding and have it in hand, then we would be coming back to the Finance and Operations Subcommittee to have discussions about what we're calling a restorative budget. So when we land on the actual budget position reductions, once we've gone through redistricting, and I would just say to you, having done that process before, redistricting generally in most school systems is something that is done and looked at and planned on for over a year. We are doing it obviously within less time than that, but just want to make sure that people understand that it is going to take some time to get it right. We will continue to try to keep, once we really have a plan that we believe is ready for some public view, we will present that. We'll get some feedback on it, I'm sure. And we will be notifying people as soon as we can about where we think we are. The goal for us is to notify as many people as we can with the position in terms of position reductions by before April vacation. And that, then moving forward to really try to get even closer on the reductions by the last week in April. We are very much aware that people need to know, and this is not an easy time for anybody, certainly, but people do need to prepare for the possibility that they may not have a position next year, so that they can apply for positions elsewhere. So in past years, we've been kind of taking advantage of other school systems who have made similar reductions, and we've been able to hire staff from other school systems who have lost their positions elsewhere. Unfortunately, this year, we're going to be in the opposite position. So I would just ask Mr. Lee if I have missed anything, or you'd like to add.
No, I think the salient point is that by becoming more efficient, we're able to reduce staff to recognize the savings that the budget demands. So, as we look at the numbers and as you indicated, Mr. Kokoris, what ends up happening at Morrison in that scenario provides some flexibility in terms of reductions we could take or some reconfigurations with respect to other students we would look at. But it's the efficiency that makes it cost effective and allows for the reductions that are necessary here.
I appreciate that. And, you know, again, I know you're looking at the ways to do this in the least disruptive manner. And we would ask, you know, again, that you continue to consider things that way. I can tell the public and the committee that as you start to see the, you know, other towns get into their budget cycle, you can see that there, you know, is definitely an issue statewide. You know, I talked to Dr. Hackett this morning about a school district that is going out for an override for $5 million to cover the, you know, the shortfall. So unfortunately, it's real. I wish, you know, we could be having a different discussion, but it's real. And, you know, we have to do the best we can to be the least disruptive we can in managing these cuts. And, you know, I think you've come up with some plans that make sense. I know there, you know, there's some grief with all of that, but I think the plans make sense and keep programs whole and take into account the shift in population and so forth. So we do appreciate that effort.
Thank you, Mr. Corson. You know, I don't, it's no small point, and I guess only because, you know, for the last 5 years or so, as we've been doing budgets, you know, staff at Ross, parents at Ross understand that they are in a declining enrollment situation. And I often get asked the question, you know, is Ross going to have to close? Is Ross going to have to close? And, you know, from my perspective, closing a school is a huge decision to make. And it's not, in my view, the right decision to make for us because we do need the space. It's just that where the space is located in town doesn't happen to be where the kids are. So this is a correction to that. It keeps our buildings online. And I know that there have been times over the last several years that we would have wished that it would have been really nice to have had another school that we could have shifted students around with, but we were looking for space and we didn't have it. And that's why we have the 2 middle school projects going on. But you know, to close the school and then 10 years from now, if there's an influx of students, student population increases, then you've mothballed a resource that is very difficult to bring back online. And I know you experienced it here with Monadequat several years ago. So we will continue to keep you informed, give you as much detail as we can. To your point, this is not an easy situation to be in. You know, we recognize that certainly, and we recognize the kind of how people are going to feel about wanting information as quickly as possible. But we also want to make sure that we are giving solid, accurate information as we move along.
Thank you, Doctor. Are there any other questions from the committee?
I'm all set, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, if there are not, then I would ask for a motion to approve the 71,574,118 so we can bring it forward to the committee and to the public hearing on Monday.
So moved.
Do I have a second? I'll second it. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Roll call vote. Ms. Saros,
Aye.
Mr. Devon,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. So unanimous. We will bring forward to the committee and to the public hearing on Monday night the sum of 71,574,118. Okay. Do we have any other business, Dr. Hackett, this evening? And our next meeting will be, I assume, next Thursday, a week from today.
We haven't scheduled it yet, but that generally is the schedule we try to stay on.
Okay, and that would be at 5:15 p.m. Does that work for the members of the subcommittee?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Saros,
Sorry. Yeah.
okay, so that will be tentatively our next meeting date. We don't have any other business this evening other than to go into executive session. So I will I will read the motion for executive session, and then I'll entertain a motion for that and to adjourn, as we won't be coming out of executive session back into public session. So consideration to enter into executive session pursuant to Chapter 30A, Section 21A3, to discuss strategy for the negotiation of collective bargaining, as the chair declares that an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the negotiating and/or legal position of the Finance and Operations Subcommittee. So can
So
I have a
moved, sir.
motion?
So
Thank you.
moved, sir.
And a second, please.
Second.
Okay, motion and second, roll call vote, Ms. Saros,
Aye.
Mr. Devon,
Aye.
chair votes aye, and then I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved, sir.
Second.
Okay, motion and second, roll call vote, Ms. Saros,
Aye.
Mr. Devon,
Aye.
chair votes aye, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you. And Doctor, will you be sending us a separate link?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night.